Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode number 3. I am joined today, as always, by my co-host, Maggie Parke. I'm Corey Olsen. I guess I should mention that. And today we are going to discuss more about adaptation. In particular, today we're going to be looking at the... we're going to take a look at the trailer. We're going to take a look at the Amazon trailer. And I want to do something which I've seen very little of. I've seen a lot of nitpicking of the trailer. I've seen a lot of anxiety about the trailer. I've seen a lot of very interesting and engaged speculation based on the trailer. But what I have not seen much or gotten myself much of a chance to participate in is an actual discussion of the story in the trailer. Like, you know, there's been a lot of like focus on details and what those details might mean or tell us, whether, you know, whether that's coming from a place of, you know, anxiety and upset, or whether that's coming from a place of excitement and anticipation. A lot of focus on the details. Very natural. I mean, of course, far be it from me to criticize anyone for like looking at something really in careful detail and such. But I feel like a lot of the big picture is being kind of lost, and I haven't seen many people talking about the big thing, the bigger picture. So let's start off.
And there's loads of speculation. Yeah, there's loads of speculation of, you know, oh, this could mean that and that could mean this, and I love that. That's fun. But yeah, I also haven't seen a lot of any kind of actual discussion about it as a film project. You know, people aren't talking about a little bit about the CGI and things like that, but I feel like I haven't seen a lot about setting and lighting and, you know, camera angles and things like that.
Yeah. So let's actually, for this exercise, let's not think about, let's not think even about Tolkien lore and stuff. Let's just look at this as a piece of its own. What is the story that we're seeing here? What is this about? Anyway, so let's just watch it through again. But as we watch it, I want you to think about that. Don't focus on details. Don't start asking questions like, what does this mean? What does this tell us about Galadriel's character or whatever? What's the story? What's happening in this show? Like, pretend you've never heard of this show before and know nothing about anything of the background. What are we getting? What are we seeing? What is this show seem to be interested in? And of course, what we're getting is not the show. We're getting a trailer for the show, right? So this is a piece of messaging about the show. They're trying to tell us something about the show to prepare us in a certain way for what this show is interested in. Are we picking up what they're putting down? Let's see if we can do that, right? Okay, so let's watch it through, and then we'll kind of talk it through, probably something more like scene by scene after that. All right, so here we go.
Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? There's wonders in this world beyond our wandering. I can feel it.
Okay, so, sorry, accidentally started again. Okay, so now, and first I want to acknowledge several of you have been making comments which are perfectly correct, right? Perfectly correct. Edith was saying, I'm a little leery of trying to interpret a story based on a short trailer. I've seen too many trailers that don't turn out to be completely irrelevant to the film that they're teasing. Totally agree. That can absolutely happen, right? So we have to totally keep that in mind as we're doing this, right? Who knows the conclusions that we might draw about what this trailer is doing. What this trailer is doing and what the actual show ends up doing might end up being sort of widely separated, right? But this is what we've got right now. But I do think, Edith, that that's a really, really important point to make, though, right? That when we're drawing conclusions about the trailer, we have to remember it's perfectly legit to draw conclusions about what story we're getting from this trailer. We just have to remember that that's a conclusion about this trailer and not necessarily a conclusion about the show. So yeah, that's very that's very very, very sensible. Okay, you have a very long name that starts with something about Spartans. Says that it's sort of a collage, not a real trailer. Yes and no. I'd be cautious about that. So first of all, yeah, it's true. This is not. I mean, we're not getting. It's not a piece of narrative, right? So when I talk about the story of the trailer, I'm being a little bit figurative in how I'm talking, because it's not, of course, just a narrative from one end to the next, and especially the latter parts, right? The last 20 seconds or so, it's very collage-like. I agree. We're getting a whole bunch of images. However, I think we'd be foolish to assume that those are just kind of slapped together in there, right? I mean, and Maggie, you know more about this than I do, but I've always been under the impression, I'm not saying that all trailers are well done, because there are bad trailers out there, obviously, but trailers are fairly carefully crafted pieces of marketing, right? I mean, they are definitely trying to do something very particular. They're trying to capture something very particular. Maybe they'll succeed, maybe they won't. Maybe the thing that they're capturing is like the heart of the show. Maybe it will turn out to be quite far from the heart of the show, but they're totally doing a thing, right?
Well, and this was my thought with, like, when you're creating a trailer as well, that's usually a different department, it's completely different set of skills, and it's a tool in the marketing machine. Like, it absolutely will tell us things about the story, and we can glean some nice little nods and information. But we'll go through it frame by frame kind of a thing, but like, I was so impacted by how they were showing us these things, and what they were showing wasn't as important, and what came before it as well, that we had the posters beforehand. So we had 23, 24 images that brought in all the speculation, and then the 60-second thing that was landscapes and characters and sweeping establishing shots and stuff like that. They're really just setting foundations, like, here's what visuals you can expect. Now we'll get into detail, so it's really just like, ooh, let it land. And the pacing of the trailer too, it starts with these like slower establishing shots, and the collage at the end is like boom, 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 boom. That's supposed to get you hyped up. That they're looking for that emotive response from people who have never seen it, but then also getting like the nods from the fans that are like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, they're hitting all those things. Yeah.
And then of course the thing that I think, so I'll jump ahead. I wasn't going to talk about this first, but since you were just mentioning that,
sorry.
No, it's good. What I think is the most effective part of the trailer is the hand clasp at the end, right? Because of that pacing thing, right? We get this continuously accelerating pace all the way through the trailer until we get the boom, 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 shot, 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 and then the pause on the hands, right? As you said, very much very set up by the posters, right, where we were getting all torsos and hands of people, right, and we got this super close up of the two hands, both of which hands we saw in the posters, right. This is Acorn Girl and Apple Dude, right, who are holding hands here, or she is taking his hand. He's holding out his hand to her, and she's taking it, right, and the way that we get the sort of silence of kind of the way that the music climaxes and freezes, and then the scene slows down, and we get the slow tender thing, and then the long dark pause. I mean,
it's purposeful. They're taking you on this emotive journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really interesting. Like that's and this tells me something. So like, I wasn't going to start here, but maybe I'm glad we started here, because this is not only is it the last image, they have made this into a climactic image. Like it is clearly, as you say, both important. An emotional and kind of, I don't know. I mean, they hit this really hard. And I think if there's a single visual image that sticks with you from the trailer, it's very likely to be this one of the hand holding at the end, you know, the reaching out the hand and the small hand coming and grasping it. You know, when I was discussing this with the OneRing.net folks on Super Bowl evening, we were talking about tenderness and hope seeming to be kind of attached to this, and I can see both of those things. Of course, lots of people are suspicious, like it might be deceptive, right? You know, they might be, you know, sort of setting us up to be shocked and surprised. But it certainly is a very soft, quiet, tender moment compared to all of the fast-paced, bright lights.
Action.
It's even like sort of dark, right? I mean, like it's just this dark, plain background. None of the gorgeousness, right? We've got the simplest fabrics, the dirtiest hands, and the plainest background of anything in the whole trailer, right? So,
and so many of the other shots are balls of fire and battle scenes and in full-on action, which obviously is also purposeful. Let's hook those people in that want to see that kind of Game of Thrones. You know, I don't want to do too many allusions to that, but that is, you know, the who they're after. But then to end on this soft, thoughtful moment, I do think that's quite purposeful, to be like, we got something a little different.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems to me, I mean, you can think about this as a sort of as a message of if I think about like what this tells us about the message the trailer is sending, right? The message that I feel like the trailer is sending here is, hey, this show is not, yes, we have all this stuff, like which we were just showing off, right? We have like the battle sequences and the gorgeous landscape and the the incredible scenery and the improbable action and all of the action stunts and all of this stuff, right? And monsters and everything else. But the focal point of this show, like what matters in this show, is going to be like the personal relationships, right? This is going to be a story about people. Yeah, about people and the connection among people. So again, that's what I felt like the trailer was communicating through this choice of the very remarkable focal point that they made this in the trailer.
Agreed. And that they end on that, because there's so much leading up to it that didn't feel run of the mill, because I don't think this was run of the mill, but there was stuff at the beginning that was, I think, supposed to just ground us in what we already know. It was almost like calming the herd. Like, yes, look, there is this beautiful shot that does kind of remind you of Minas Tirith. And look, there is this soft lighting that does kind of remind you of Rivendell. And so there are these nice little things that I don't think they minded the associations that we all have from past adaptations, which is like, great, cool, fans are happy, tick. And if I'm not a fan, you would watch that and be like, oh yeah, I remember those big movies. That was pretty fun. You know, it would draw you in. And then you get the bam, 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 bam action. And then you get, oh. So yeah, I do like that they really ended it on that, the not gilded thing, the not fiery thing, the real soft human connection, or hobbit connection.
Right. Person connection in any case. Yeah. And here's the other thing that I take from this. I'm a little bit more, I felt very confident about my first conclusion. This second conclusion, I am a little bit less confident in, but it still seems to me fairly likely or fairly conspicuous in any case. It may seem like a small thing, but how dirty their hands are. We talked about the dirty hands in the posters, right? That was a big deal in the post, very apparent in the posters. And one of the things that we were talking about, I'm not sure we ever got around to actually having this part of that conversation, which we never quite got to finish because a whole bunch of stuff kept happening. But one of the conclusions that I was drawing from the posters themselves, even before the trailer came out, was that they appear to be doing some really interesting sort of class mixtures in this story, which is a really important thing both for them to show and for us to see. And I say class, the reason I use the word class, and I'm not trying to be too like Marxist about this or something. All I'm saying is in the Silmarillion as a whole, and especially in the really sketchy Second Age stuff, all we know about are the like kings and rulers, right? I mean, like, we know nothing about the actual like people of Middle Earth.
And if we're talking about world building, you have to have people,
right? So I think that they seem to be all the dirty hands seem to me to be signaling this is not just going to be a show that's only interested in the kings and queens and what they're up to. Which, I mean, if you think about it, even things like the Hobbit films, you know, you have Dale in the Hobbit films as the like working man connection, right? You know, Bard is sort of your, you know, commoner perspective, right? But the dwarves and elves are almost exclusively princes and princelings, right? I know not all of the dwarves in the Hobbit party are princes, but they're, you know, they're sort of part of the elite. You know, they're kind of, they're not like Joe Dwarf working at his forge. You know, this is Thorin, the returning king, and his companions, right?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Now, if you think of it in terms of like tension for a story too, you know, class is such a no-brainer that of course we're going to have these interspecies relationships that people are all discussing, the human and the elves and things like that, and the tension that that creates. But if you just think about something as simple as like Downton Abbey, the entirety of that tension is between the classes of upstairs and downstairs. You know, Titanic, upstairs and downstairs.
Upstairs
like
and downstairs,
this is a tension that the whole world can understand and has seen examples of. So why wouldn't you use that really real life thing and pull that into this fictional world? Because you'll get in there that much faster.
Yeah. So and it honestly, it answers a question for me about their adaptation approach, right? Like, so they, you know, we've mentioned before the Second Age, like, there's all this wide open space, right? We have these like few small islands of incidents and characters about even the characters we know very little about as far as like what they were like and every, you know, like as people, as characters, in fact, rather than just you know, names in a genealogy or whatever. But anyway, so we there's so much room for them to fill stuff in, but of course there's still only so much they can do in a show, right? So the question was like, where was their focus going to be? What were they going to be doing? And so one of the things that I've, ever since they released the posters, one of the things that I've been getting really clearly is these are stories that are going to be, they're not neglecting the high figures, right? We're going to get Celebrimbor, we're going to get Gilgalad, we're going to get Galadriel, we're going to get Elrond, we're going to get the King of the Dwarves, we're going to, you know, like we're getting all of those people who are sufficiently important that their names get into the historical synopses, which is all we have from the Second Age, is the historical synopses. But they've also been showing pretty clearly that we're going to be getting more. We're going to be getting also life in Middle-earth, right? How normal people were living during the Second Age. That's what I love about the idea of including hobbits, actually. I don't think there's any serious problem theoretically, you know, with including hobbits. I mean, the hobbits had ancestors, and the only thing that we were told for sure is that we don't know anything about them. So, you know, it's fine.
Excellent
anyway,
fodder for adaptation.
Yeah, great, excellent terrain there. And anyway, and I've loved the idea ever since the posters and our discussions of the posters. I have liked the idea of using hobbits as a kind of foundation there, like to help us as readers be in touch with what it was like to live in Eriador in the Second Age, right? What was life like on the ground for the common people? Because remember, this is one of the things that makes The Lord of the Rings as a story so successful, is the way that we are grounded in the Hobbit framework, and we see everything from the Hobbit point of view. I think that on that level, I think the choice to have hobbits is a really good idea, you know, is a really good idea. And that brings me back to where I'd originally been planning to start, which is at the very beginning. The thing that surprised me most about I want to just like, I want to watch the opening sequence. So the first chunk of the trailer that I look at as one unit is right up until the first title shows, right? The voiceover part, right? The voice, which is, I think pretty clearly, a Hobbit voice. So the very fact that they've chosen what seems to be a Hobbit voice. And by the way, I'm going to continue using the word Hobbit. People say Harfoots. I know, again, the show, they call them Harfoots. And I get that. Of course, I know where they're coming from there. And I understand they're not using the word Hobbit because they're not wanting everybody to think this is the Shire, right? You know, this is exactly the, you know, that there's a, you know, these are the, you know, forefathers of the forefathers of the forefathers of the Shire hobbits. And they're wanting to be clear about that and not, but I'm going to be much less cautious and just like risk fomenting confusion, and still call them hobbits until I'm forced to do otherwise. But anyway, so like listen to her voiceover and her voiceover. And again, I think in seeing the trailer, like the first, I don't know, 15 times I saw the trailer, I was still so focused on the visuals, right? Like, wow, oh, that's probably Numenor, and ooh, look at the landscape, and oh, what's going on here? That I was like barely even processing the fact that we were getting a voice. Like there is a little story arc that we're given at the beginning here, right? A frame to this story, an initial frame that the voiceover provides, right?
Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there?
Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? So we have the first question, who's speaking? And the second question, to whom is that? Who's the you who's supposed to be wondering what else is out there, right? And of course, the way that it functions as voiceover, implicitly, we the viewers are the you, right? We're the ones being, or the question is being asked of us as we're watching. Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there, right? Which, by the way, I think is actually a brilliant opening line for this trailer. Because,
especially
of course... Go ahead.
I get excited, especially with the scenes they just showed us. You know, they're showing us these incredible, sweeping, establishing shot views and saying, can you imagine what else is out there? So, like, and the way it was said, too, it was as if she was sitting next to us and was kind of telling us a secret from her heart. There's this, like, real soft connection of, like, haven't you ever wondered? Like, she's trusting us because she's never left, which means she's quite narrow. But there's this big world that we just got a glimpse of, and there's this immediate connection even in that first few seconds.
Yeah, I agree. There's a kind of vulnerability in the questions and the way they're asked. Absolutely. And of course, I love how it speaks on several different levels. Right? We have the inside the frame where apparently we are hearing from, as you say, a character who has lived a sheltered, you know, probably geographically, but not imaginatively restricted life, right? But of course, on another level, we as viewers are being asked the question, haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? When we're being shown a shot of Numenor, which we've never been able to see before in any other adaptation, right? So the applicability, not just to like movie fans, but even to Tolkien fans themselves, right? Hey, so you know the Lord of the Rings, right? You've heard of Numenor, but you've never seen it, right?
Haven't you wondered? Yeah.
Right? Have you ever wondered what else is out there? Here's what's beyond the boundaries of, you know, like the Lord of the Rings story that you know, especially if you've only seen the Peter Jackson films. So I love that kind of doubling there, which I think is really fun. I think it's really cool. But I want to focus for a second on inside the frame. I want to come back, as you say, to this character and how that character is being developed. And again, you know, we only get a few seconds, but look, this is how screen adaptations work, right? I mean, you know, I've been reflecting, you know, Maggie, on what you were saying about how long shots normally are, you know, a single shots. There is a very great deal of narrative and, you know, sort of emotional and, you know, other kinds of like work that is being that is done by a film in a, you know, a 2-second shot, a 3-second shot. And it's one of the reasons why I think I'm always very, there are a lot of people who are very resistant to kind of digging too deep, you know, and being like, oh, like you can't take, you know, it's you know, they didn't mean all that. And of course, whether or not they intended everything that I'm seeing in a shot, I don't know. But it is certainly true that they're intending a lot. It might not be the things that you're seeing, but they're definitely intending a lot. These, I get the vague impression sometimes talking to people that people believe that movies are just like slapped together, you know?
Yeah.
And it's just not true.
That's like one of my first film classes ever. The entire lecture was just nothing is an accident. Nothing is an accident. Now, every single thing in that shot is, first of all, very expensive. Somebody had to go out and choose the color or buy the thing or whatever. So everything is very considered. Yeah. It's
I remember
thrown together.
There's an anecdote that really brought this home to me, and it was an anecdote from a former colleague of mine at the college that I used to teach. And he was telling a story from when he had been teaching at another school down in the South. And they were, somebody came, there were, a production came and was filming a movie on site on the campus while he was there. And this one shot was shot in one of his colleagues' offices, one of his senior colleagues' offices, big office with like huge bookcases and stuff. And of course, his professor's office, huge bookcases covered with books, looked very scholarly, right? When they shot the scene, and I'm forgetting the movie. I think it was like a Bette Midler movie. I forget what it was. Anyway, when they did the shot in the office, you could see the wall of books in the background. You couldn't read them. You couldn't tell what books they were, but you could see them in the background. In preparation for the shot, they removed all of the professor's actual books from the bookcases and replaced them all with different books, which you also couldn't read the spines of or anything. It wasn't like they were planting particular books. They were all out of focus in the screen, but like they didn't like the actual scholarly books of the actual scholarly, you know, resident of that office, which like it wasn't quite right. So they just like, they took out those books and replaced them with different books for no other reason than just, I mean, like that's the kind of thing that they do. It's not just enough to be like wall of books. That's what we're trying to establish, wall of books. They had wall of books, but it wasn't exactly the correct wall of books.
Yeah, but even like what you're describing, I'm like, oh, well, it was probably something about the color mallet. Like,
right, it probably was, yeah.
I mean, they had to shift that around so it muted the, you know, it matched the clothing that they were wearing because the tone of that scene was subdued, and you know, so there's so many factors that could go into it, and if there were red books behind her, that would throw the whole thing off. And
exactly. I mean, it's just like there's nothing taken for granted. Again, that's not to say that every theory anybody comes up with about what they intended is correct, but I am always resistant to people's resistance when they say like, oh, you know, I think that's thinking about it too hard. Like they think about it really hard. They think about every scene really hard. It's part of like, what the art is here.
I remember seeing the Lord of the Rings exhibit when it came to London, where you could see, you know, the chainmail that they put together by hand and stuff, and the model of Minas Tirith that had clotheslines and spilled beer and on sides of the model that was never shot. You know, it's just everything is done to the nth degree. Yeah.
I mean, that's it's one of the reasons why movies are so expensive, is that
especially when the expectation is this high. Like, I mean, you can definitely go see a crap movie that did not put things, you know, thought together behind. They just had a free place to shoot for a few hours. Like, there's a lot of crap movies that are slapped together, but this isn't one of them. This is one that is very thought out, and there's departments to choose what book is behind them. You know. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. Anyway, but I've gotten distracted. Let me go back and get the initial question and continue through.
Haven't you ever wondered what else is out there? There's wonders in this world beyond our wandering.
Okay, so that's the second line. There are wonders in this world beyond our wandering, right? And this is when we're getting the sweeping landscape shot, right? Up over the crest of the hill and then down into, like, behold, New Zealand, right? And this is, of course, where we get probably the single visual element that I understand least. That is why
I knew you were
anyone
gonna bring that.
goes backpacking with them and antlers. Like I can't do the antlers. I don't get it. I don't. Maybe it'll. I'm still hopeful. I mean, like I'm pretty good at like suspending disbelief, and I'm pretty good at like giving the benefit of the doubt. So I'm not gonna just pan it for the moose antlers. I'm just saying I need an explanation, right? Why on earth anybody would go around with like at least the equivalent of like 50 pounds of moose antlers strapped to your sides. Like it's...
I'm telling myself they're sleds, because that's some serious grassland and they have some ground to cover. So they just put their butt on it and slide down the grasses.
Okay. If it has like a convertible function, I'm ready. I'm ready for that.
I don't really know. Yeah.
Like, and I would not critique anybody who like wore enormous antlers on their shoulders like that for like ceremonial purposes and stuff. But like, I'm going hiking. I gotta first strap on my massive antlers. Like, I don't get it. I don't get that at all. I just don't get that. But anyway, go ahead.
There's a comment here, Art of Praise Moyer. That was the other thing I actually thought too, of like, there's probably some sort of trade element happening, that they're on their way to market. They've just come back from hunting, you know. We can assume they're probably a valuable item in terms of creating buttons and needles and whatever else.
If this is the most convenient, I'm not even convinced that this would be the most convenient way to haul them. If you're just hauling antlers for like, you could still overlap them and strap them to your back. The wind resistance alone, much less the weight.
Well, but maybe bone is less dense in Middle Earth. I don't know.
Who knows? Maybe it's all good. Anyway, who knows? But apart from
moving on from the antlers,
I'm trying to get past my antler problem. We have again the line, right? Like what she has said, she just refers to our wanderings, and we get the two wanderer characters, it looks like, right? So we go from from the frame of reference of the speaker seems to me to be the wonderful, fantastical outside her world shot of Numenor there at the beginning, to this is her world, right? This is her wanderings, and which is, by the way, I also love the way, thinking again about kind of the overlay of how we as viewers are responding to this, right? One of the really cool things is that, okay, no, we've never seen Numenor before. You know, we've never seen a city in Numenor before, but we have seen cities, right? Cities are familiar to the majority of the viewers, right? Whereas wanderings like this through the wilderness, you know, wandering along the ridge in this like vast open country is in fact quite foreign, right? And the idea of the the untamed wilds of Middle Earth, that's one of the things that people enjoy escaping to, right? From our world and into that, you know, those wild, untamed frontiers of Middle Earth. And whereas, again, from within the frame of the speaker, this is to her the familiar, right? But there's this way in which that gets kind of ironically reversed. On the one hand, in that first line, we are brought in close to the, we're sharing, right? We're hearing her sharing with us. Haven't you ever wondered, right? And I have imagined, you know, that there are like really like this, you know, so this act of fantasy, right? We're being invited into this act of fantasy. But then we're kind of distanced from her, I think, in the second shot, because this seems to be her familiar world. And this is not our familiar world, right? This is, both of them, arguably, are equally wonders beyond our imagination, right? And yet that's not the case for her. So I think that that's kind of interesting there. So
I also love the alliteration there of the wanderings and the wanderings, because it harkens back to that hymn, you know, I wandered as I wandered. And,
yes, right.
You know, there's just so many lovely little associations with that.
Yeah, the wordplay of wandering and wandering is really fun.
Yeah, it feels very inviting.
I agree. And by the way, if I could just do a little public service announcement to people who are here in the chat. People, if you are here in the chat and you are currently like asking lore questions about Tolkien lore and what they may or may not be doing with a point of Tolkien lore, that's a very relevant question, and we're totally interested in talking about that. But can I just suggest, let's think about this right now. Can we do that? Think about this right now. Listen. Let's listen more, talk less is a really cool thing for doing all this stuff. Like, we'll get there. We'll get to those questions. But let's think about this together is what I would suggest to you. Okay. And then we get the third scene.
I'm wandering.
And I wander.
I can feel it.
Now, the I can feel it as we zoom in on her face is what, of course, leads me to believe that she's the speaker. Right? When we get the first person statement, right? Not only a first person statement, but a deeply personal expression of emotion, right? I can feel it, right? That we get as we're zooming in on her face and her bright eyes, you know, widened and looking up, right? So, and what do we see here? Or what do we hear from that line? I can feel it. What can she feel? The conviction that there are...
call to adventure.
Right, the call to adventure. Like, she can feel that there are, you know, wonderful places beyond her imagining, right? Beyond their wandering. That there's something else out there. And she has a firm conviction about it. And notice her conviction is based not in lore, right? She's not heard stories about it. She's not, you know, she's not believing in the traditions of their people. It's a personal conviction. I can feel it, she says, right? I can feel it. And that's kind of interesting to me. And what do we see in this shot? What do you make of this shot? What I find the light source in this shot really interesting in a couple different ways. What are your thoughts about that? Because it's like dark, but we get this very prominent light source in the middle, right?
It's incredibly warm, and it did make me think of the whole rule of thirds thing that I was talking about. Did I talk about this last time, or was this in my class? Where you can divide an image with a tic-tac-toe box, and the rule of thirds is this like idea that if you can do that to an image, divide it by thirds this way and this way, then your brain's really happy. So I looked at this, it was just like, oh yes, satisfying. So between like the super warm light right in the center, her very childlike curly hair, warm and friendly, inviting, and also how she's sitting and looking up, it's very childlike. It's very childlike. Like it's like she's looking up at Santa. So it just all kind of gives to this like warm and fuzzy kind of feeling. It also really reminded me of Tinkerbell from Hook, the Julia Roberts version. So that whole association, I was just like, oh, childhood, you know, it was just a sweet, cozy feeling.
Her voice as well, I think, throughout the voiceover here seems tailored to elicit that same kind of response. It sounds like a child's voice, and eliciting that kind of childlike wonder, imagination, dreaming, and then this is the moment when with the shift between the theoretical "haven't you ever wondered" to the present and sort of convicted, I can feel it, right? That's becoming a reality now. Like, this is the moment when I'm, you know, like, she's gonna seize the day in some way, some sense, right? There's some change that's coming, that's happening right now, right? We've come to a turning point in her career, right?
Well, it also looks like she's not in a permanent location. Like, she's already on the move somewhere.
Right.
And it definitely looks like we're having a restful moment around a fire, but she's very dirty. So we assume they're on some sort of a journey, right? Like, there's kind of already this idea, oh, did they have to leave somewhere? Are they moving towards something better, something worse? Like, yeah, you kind of already are set up for this. Ooh, tell me the story around the campfire.
Yeah. Yes. And so when I think about... So again, the very first thing that I found, the more I thought about it, the more striking I found it. And it connects back to what we were saying about what I was saying about the dirty hands and the whole class thing, right? I was ready when I was like prepared to watch the trailer. I'm sitting there in the Super Bowl waiting for the commercial break in which the trailer was going to play, and it was like 2 or 3 commercial breaks after I thought it was going to be, and so I kept sort of impatiently waiting for the next commercial break. And anyway, as I was watching, getting ready for I was like, when the opening sequence comes, I'm like, okay, lay it on me, like, give me Galadriel, give me Gil-galad, give me Celebrimbor, right? And what we got instead was this entirely different perspective, right? The opening gambit of the entire show, right? And as much as this trailer is the opening gambit of the entire process of preparing us, at least, for the show, the opening gambit is a mortal perspective and this sort of childlike hobbitish perspective, which is perceiving the greatness. It's the fantasy move, right? Thinking about Tolkien's writings on fantasy and on fairy stories, right? That escape, fantasy and escape, and even consolation concept of fantasy. That's the perspective that we get first. And of course, I cannot help but think of the themes, these kinds of themes as they are developed. I want to be careful here. Tolkien doesn't develop too many themes. We get references to, and the primary references we get to these are pretty non-mainstream. I'm thinking especially here of, we get hints of it in the Silmarillion. When the humans arrive in Beleriand, right? When the humans arrive in Beleriand, we're told that they were wandering because they heard that there was a light in the west, right? They were living in dark and danger, but they heard that there was a light in the west, and they've been going to seek it, right? So that's what we're told in the Silmarillion. We're given very few details about that. It's not really a fully developed story or a fully developed theme, but that concept is really central to the human experience in the Elder Days as we get it in the published Silmarillion. That perspective of there's something else out there. There's a bigger story that we can be a part of. There's a light in the west. There is consolation. There's more than, the lot of men is unhappy, but there's more than that possible. There's more than that that's out there, right? And so that's, once I began to really kind of process the first half of this trailer, I was like, okay, it's really, they seem to be playing on that theme, like that whole kind of idea. Now, I don't know where she's going to end up going, right? I don't know who it looks like. Of course, over on the left-hand side looks to be the shaggy, rough wool robe of Apple Dude, whose hand she takes at the end, right? So this is the beginning moment, and he seems to be associated with her conviction by, I think he's the one she's looking up to, right? He's the Santa Claus, as you're pointing out in this picture, right? And then she takes his hand at the end.
And that is the lovely bookend of this, that we have that voiceover and that pause, that almost silence. It's only her voice we hear there, really. And then all this action, boom, 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 and then we get this back at the end. So it's this lovely, like, with all this good stuff in the middle that gets you really excited.
Exactly.
I'm gonna let my cat out. I'll be right back.
Okay, sure. Anyway, so I'll go through some of the other stuff here. This stuff is where I found the heart. Oh, hang on a second. I'm just looking at her changes of facial expression. Isn't that interesting? She goes through like several different expressions. Uncertainty at the beginning. So I just started. I was about to advance past, and that led me to just, I kind of accidentally with my finger did a frame by frame over her. The changes in her facial expression at the very beginning, when it cuts to it originally, when it fades in, we get she's
that kind
very
of gawking.
Yeah, gawking and nervous, maybe uncertain, and then there's this like flash of a smile, which is still kind of an uneasy smile, like, is it okay for me to smile kind of smile, and then it kind of fades again, like I'm not 100% sure of exact, there's a lot of her face here seems to be at odds with the words that they're voicing over it, right? I can feel it is very confident, right? Is very certain. But her face does not really look altogether certain. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, cool. Anyway, so then we get the second part, which is dominated by these titles, right? Before the King, with the waterfall and the ice climbing Galadriel, and then Before the Fellowship, and then we got the arrows, and then Before the Ring. Now, the titles themselves are clearly references to the movies, right? I mean, this is trying to frame this in relationship with everything else, right? Yes, of course, it's before the King, meaning it's before the return of the Return of the King is, they're like winding back the clock deliberately, right? The Peter Jackson trilogy ends with the Return of the King because everyone's trying to pretend the Hobbit movies didn't happen. So we end with Return of the King, right? So we're winding back before that. And then, Before the Fellowship, right? Because, so that's, the beginning of the Peter Jackson sequence. No, it's even before that, right? We're going back before that. And then, of course, Before the Ring itself, even before the Ring of Power was created. So, and so that the third one is the sort of the real, the hook for where we're actually going. So I think that's all very clearly intentional, but this tells me something about whom the trailer believes it is communicating with, right? But I will say they're covering their bases pretty well.
That's what I was going to ask. I'm like, who do you think the trailer's playing for? Because I feel like it was as broad as it could be while still tipping a hat to the fan.
Right. I felt like they sent a really clear message to the fan base in the title trailer by the fact that they did the only voiceover we got, the only voice that we heard was just reading the Ring poem, right? It was all text straight out of the book, right? And that I thought was a pretty clear signal, right? But it was also a clear in another sense, like Tolkien. So non-Tolkien fans will recognize it vaguely, right? I mean, they'll know. I think you start reciting the Ring poem, ending with one ring to rule them all. I mean, if there is one line of text that Tolkien ever wrote that has made it into every level of the popular imagination, it is one ring to rule them all, right?
Yeah.
Think of the hundreds of thousands of memes on that line that have happened, in the, the one blank to rule them all is used constantly, right? So on that level, the Ringverse is going to be enormously familiar. But again, to Tolkien fans, it's also going to say, look, grounded in the text, right? But even more than that, Tolkien fans might recognize that the Ringverse, remembering the context of the Ringverse, right? It was the verse about the forging of the rings, and so we're getting, and then the that combined with the visual imagery of the melting metal and everything, gets us into forging of the rings of power frame of mind. But anyway, so when I said like the audience in particular, again with these titles that we're getting here, I think they are. I agree with you that it's very general. They're doing things for Tolkien fans. They're doing things for Peter Jackson fans, right? Contextualizing this in connection with the Peter, like to kind of frame it in relationship to what right? If you're a Peter Jackson film fan, and then also doing general hooks for like, hey, are you vaguely interested in a high fantasy epic? If so,
right.
then
you like swords.
Right.
Yeah. Are you a fan of arrows? And
yeah,
also
exactly.
And also just alluding to the titles, I mean, if you lived under a rock, you might not have known the titles of Lord of the Rings films. But if you had never been to the cinema 2001 to 2003, if you didn't ever see the movie, you still knew the titles. Like they dominated for 3 years, and they dominated the Academy Awards that year that Return of the King got everything. Like,
yes,
they became commonplace. So mentioning those is just kind of like, oh yeah, I remember those movies. Or you can go all the way to the other end and be like, heck yeah, that's them.
Right. Exactly. So, anyway, I think. Let's see. Where do I think that this second sequence ends? Before the ring, and we get a shot to Gilgalad. Right, a new legend begins this fall. That's the transition. The last title is the transition. A new legend begins this fall, and then that's when we get the increasingly rapid collage of shots after that.
And I've just noticed this as I was doing what you were doing, where you scroll over it and you just get like a little. If you do it real fast, look at the color change in the trailer. We open with like warm light and the grassy moose antlers, and then everything else is blue and dark. Everything is blue and dark.
Right. We get the warm dark of the campfire. Right. Blue
until that title,
ice.
and then you have oranges and fires and the leaves and bright, and that's really interesting. So that's a really good tactic that it's kind of subdued, and then as the pace picks up, the imagery also changes to be really fiery and warm.
Yeah. So right at that title, A New Legend Begins This Fall, that's when the lighting picks up again. This shot of what is presumably Linden and Gilgalad here on the cliff with the waterfall. That's the first like quasi daylight shot that we've gotten against. You're right. I didn't notice the dark and blue, but you're right. And then we've got dark and warm, but then fiery. Yeah, the
but
orange.
But still red. Red beard, warm skin, warm light behind Elrond.
Fire, sparks. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the glint, the orange glint of presumably fire on the armor of the elves in that last scene. Yeah. Interesting.
I don't know the importance of that yet. I just love seeing those things and being like, file that away.
Yeah. That is an interesting. That is an interesting trend. Yeah. Bjarnasonar, by the way, I don't want anybody to think I'm making any claims that like any of the things we're observing are like unique to this trailer or like super novel or whatever. Like who knows? Maybe they're following exactly the template that every other trailer does. My point is just that they're doing even when you're following a convention on purpose, like what you do with that convention is interesting, right? And so yeah.
And it means they're trying to meet an expectation. So like that's interesting.
That is in itself interesting. Sarah was pointing out how even in the armor here, with the shot of what is reputedly Finrod in battle against what look to be orcs, you've got again the dark and blue orcs and the gold with the orange light shining on them elves there, right? So you've got the it's a very light being surrounded by darkness kind of shot there. It's the fiery crater, which is by far the most orange of all. But that's very interesting. I hadn't really thought of that. But okay.
Where do we go?
Where do we want to go? Well, there's more that could be. I mean, obviously, we're not talking about all the different images and things. If the last thing I wanted to hit on, and this is unclear to me, Meteor Guy. If, and I think it is, so this is the naked guy shot, right? If in the foreground there is the Hobbit girl who was the voiceover at the beginning and who was sitting by the fire. And she's grabbing, and pulling naked guy out of the flaming pit in the middle of the crater. And I think we can see her. Yes, we can see her next to him there in this wider shot as well. That would seem it's hard because it's hard enough to make out, especially, you have to be able to freeze it really in order to be able to tell. I would have had to watch it probably, if I couldn't slow it down or stop it, I probably would have had to watch it 20 times before I noticed that was probably her in that shot. But if that's her pulling, if the guy whom she's looking up at next to the campfire here, right, the guy in that robe, who is Apple Dude, whose hand she's taking at the end, is Meteor Guy, right? Is the guy, if that is her, so, and of course we do have the repeated motif of the hands, right? Him reaching out his hand and her grabbing it. Mm-hmm. Now you'll notice that it's different. He's reaching out the context of the hand grabbing is quite different, right? Her body language here is, I'm hauling you out. She's rescuing him here.
Oh, see, I pictured it the other way.
Right? No?
I thought he was propped up and bracing himself and lifting her.
I thought she was pulling him.
I can see
it. The reason I think that she's pulling him and not him pulling her is because her hands are on the outside. Mm-hmm. Right? Her hand is on top of his there. Mm-hmm. Whereas if he were pulling her, his hand would be on the outside, wouldn't it? That's the thing that makes me think that she's trying to. Plus, he's the one who seems to be in distress. They're both in the middle of the fire, so he
is naked in fire. So
he is naked in fire. That would seem inconvenient for most folks. Anyway, yeah. So he's. One way or another, we have the hand holding, right? And the hand holding in a very different context than it seems like we're getting it in that final shot, right? Mm-hmm. Now, as I said, I would not have caught, it would have taken me 25 times watching this to catch that if I didn't have the ability to freeze it. But of course, they know we're going to have the ability to freeze it when they release it. So, especially since they released it on YouTube first. So anyway, I think this scene to me introduces an interesting note of doubt, even of fear, in my mind, into the whole, if we think about the way in which her character, her words, and her, the clasping of hands at the end serves as the sort of the frame of the whole trailer, right? Her words are all of hope and curiosity, and then at the end of confidence and intimacy and friendship there at the end. But this moment, holding hands with naked guy in the middle of the fire, I find it interjects doubt as to the tenor of that whole relationship and that whole question. Are things, and then I come back to I can feel it, right? Are her convictions in fact well grounded, right? They're grounded in a very subjective experience, right? Her own feelings of things, which might be right, but might not be right. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm uncertain. And then I think I'm also being influenced by the fact that I have a bad feeling about Meteor Guy. But, apart from that. Yeah. Okay. So,
don't think I have strong feelings about her yet, but I'm taking all this in and going, we'll see.
Maybe. So we didn't talk about the other character for whom we do seem to get something like a story arc would be Galadriel. Maybe rather than
Elrond.
Poor Galadriel. Yeah, we do get a little bit of an arc with Elrond as well. But what do we learn about Galadriel in this trailer?
She's badass. That is the main thing they want us to see and know.
Dude, I just noticed something for the first time. She's also not alone. I didn't notice the two dudes below her on the ice. Look at those guys.
Oh, yeah. I thought they looked like trolls.
Yeah, I didn't catch what they were, but they seem to have the exact same headgear and cloak that she has. So she's clearly the topmost of a team, it would seem to be, scaling the ice here. Which definitely suggests that she's climbing up rather than, although we see primarily lateral movement, right, in this shot. It's also clear that she's trending her way up, right? Presumably if she started down where they are and she replaces them, she displaces them in the shot. And it's just her. And then of course we get the dramatic look up. She's not quite looking us in the eye, right? Her gaze is a little bit off-centered from us. Like we're not making eye contact with Galadriel here, but it's close to eye contact with Galadriel here. Anyway, so we see her, what do we see? Striving, climbing. This is a gritty act on her part, right? We don't know what she's doing. We don't know why she's doing this. She could be trying to save herself. She could be trying to get somewhere. She could be trying to overcome. But the whole I am scaling up a cliff using only my dagger thing is intrepid, forceful,
and in no way seems fretful. She's just like, yep, I got this.
Decisive. Decisive. Yeah. So this is not a person on the defensive here, right? She's overcoming an obstacle, a very significant obstacle, even though her apparent resources for this task are fairly limited, right? As she seems only to have a dagger and nothing else in the way of climbing tools, right?
Who needs a harness or an ice pick? Nope.
I know, seriously. Come on.
When you
have a cool dagger. Then we get the raft boat thing and the guy on his wreck of a raft. But we don't learn anything about that except the word fellowship is juxtaposed with him, which seems important. And then we get arrow catching dude. Then we get, but I'm focusing on Galadriel's story. Here's our next Galadriel move. What do we have again? Assertive. We have Galadriel. Now, this is not a cavalry charge per se. No one's carrying a weapon, right? They're not charging into battle here. But she is leading a posse of people riding somewhere very fast. And of course, we have the obvious distinction of her with her white horse, right? Her white horse separated from the pack, so she's very visually distinct from everybody. We don't even see the other people. We don't know if they're humans or elves. But
very much out in front, very much leaning forward. Again, you've got rule of thirds here. And the fact that she's leaning in and going from left to right, everything is that she is charging confidently ahead. You know, there's nothing holding her back.
Yes, exactly. So we have Galadriel as undaunted overcomer of obstacles in the first shot. We have Galadriel as leader, right? I am leading the charge in the second shot. This dude who looks like he is a member of Galadriel's posse, or at least was, doesn't look excellent for him. And then the next time we get Galadriel is here, right? Galadriel with the wet hair being manhandled and her ear revealed, right? And she looks annoyed, right? But she's in this first shot of her. I think this is the first frame that we get of her. She looks vulnerable. She's not wearing much
armor.
She's not wearing armor. I mean, I don't think she's naked, but she's wearing like a bedraggled tunic, and her hair is not in a great place, right? I mean, she's just got wet, bedraggled hair, and she's sitting. She's sitting. He's standing, right? We get this shot of his beefy arm juxtaposed with her head, from the very first moment of this shot. He's very much in this sort of dominant position over her here, it would seem. which is an interesting juxtaposition from what we've seen from her, right? This is shot 3 of Galadriel in this sequence.
And if we follow the idea of, the left to the right that I just mentioned, and we talked about last time too, this is right to left. So the thread of the arm is coming from the right. So that's kind of pulling her back.
Right. Yeah. Moving in the other direction. And causing her, she's still facing to the right. Right. She's facing the forward looking direction. Right. But his hand pulling her hair aside forces her head back and her to turn that way, right? Her eye, we see her eye and head turn up. Yeah. And her whole posture rocks backwards from where she was. Yeah, it's interesting.
And then discovering the ear, obviously that was the real reveal to say this should be a shock of some kind, but I also really loved the look on her face. If you're a Phil Pullman fan, you know how they describe when someone touches your demon. That's what it hit for me. It was just like, oh, you're not supposed to do that.
Yes. There's a boundary has just been transgressed here. Like, I can't believe you just touched me.
Right.
Thing. Yes, absolutely. And again, I think there's also I think fan service involved here, right? Tolkien people know Galadriel's hair is a big deal, right? Galadriel's hair is a big deal, so I think that's. And then I don't think we get her again. No, we do not. No. That's it. We get those 3 shots of Galadriel. So, what do we get of Galadriel's story? Well, the last point that I would make about this, though, is that although the dynamics of this shot are not promising, right, as far as like her and her relationship to Beefy Arm Dude, right, who is presumably this Halbrand character or whatever, but remember, how were we introduced to him in this trailer? We were introduced to him. He came immediately after the word fellowship, right? And so that's what I'm kind of assuming, thinking about his character and her relationship with him, right? Praise, you're certainly right. I'm not assuming that the order of the sequence of the shots is chronological at all. I don't want to give that impression. I was only thinking of the 3 of them as they're presented. And if I had to characterize like the story of Galadriel as we're seeing, it's like a 2-in-1, right? The first 2 shots go together really well. Galadriel in the lead, Galadriel being brave, Galadriel taking charge and being bold. And here we have her in this vulnerable position, bedraggled, sitting down with somebody standing over her. Even though she does not seem to approve of being touched here. I agree with you about the boundary being crossed. Nevertheless, we also don't see her stabbing the guy.
Yeah,
right?
Knocking the hand away.
Yeah, exactly. She's still, apart from turning and looking at him, she's not moving or doing anything. So there's a huge contrast, in other words, between the first 2 and the third time that we see her. And I think that's seems to me to set me up again. If I'm picking up what they're putting down here, it prepares me for her to be bold, a bold go-getter, but also that this story is going to make her vulnerable, that she is going to be she's going to have a rocky road over the course of this show in some ways. I contrasted with like Gilgalad, right, who is the well-dressed dude in front of the crowd from the beginning, and sort of all the way through.
Which is excellent character development. I mean, if you just have a Galadriel that's strong and confident the whole way through, there's no room to grow. There's no scope,
And that's exactly the other conclusion that I feel forced to. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a fall because we can't really tell by this.
No, we can't tell by that.
I mean, it doesn't look like she's running the charge in that shot. So we assume she's kind of at somebody's mercy.
here. Yeah, exactly. But no, that's exactly the conclusion that I draw, that she is, that the idea is there is going to be development of Galadriel's character. And that by itself is a big deal.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we don't get development of Galadriel's character is not, I mean, stuff happens. I'm not, Galadriel has this really important moment in the book and in the film, right when she refuses to take the ring. But Galadriel's character does not exactly have an arc, right? She is up there. She remains up there. She has this important moment where she doesn't fall, which is great and everything, right? But again, she's not exactly somebody who has a developed character arc. That's not what Tolkien was doing with her character.
She's more of a tool to get the others to where they need to be.
Right. And I find Peter Jackson's Galadriel even more limited in terms of growth. Than Tolkien's Galadriel was, partly just because we see more of Tolkien's Galadriel than we do of Peter Jackson. So of course he had more time. But anyway, so yeah. And Sarah, I totally agree. I think that Cate Blanchett did a lovely job with Galadriel. Totally agree that Cate Blanchett did a lovely job. Again, I'm just saying, like, the growth of Galadriel's character is clearly not a major element of the story, right? Not every character has that kind of arc. Like, if every character grows and changes and develops, like, there have to be some constants for, if everybody's changing, then you just have chaos, right?
Well, and it doesn't mean that's a criticism. It just means that some characters are facilitators. Some characters just have to move action forward. So,
absolutely.
While you hope everybody has an arc, no matter how small their part is, there isn't always time for that.
Yeah. And there's also, I can't help but think of the idea that story is all about character and character development is a very modern idea, and not a necessity in terms of storytelling. Many excellent stories are stories about not very interesting characters who are not themselves deep or interesting or complex characters, which don't change very much because they are, like, again, if everything is in motion, if everything is dynamic and moving, you don't have a story, you have chaos, right? And it's really hard to parse. Modern people we prefer to have the stable things be like the background and the characters to be the ones moving and changing. But one pretty frequent tactic of storytelling in the older era is to have characters who were static and have other, like, the story is what changes, like the plot is what changes and grows. And if you had the character were dynamic, the example of this that C.S. Lewis gives famously is Alice in Wonderland. Like, Wonderland is the point of that story, right? Like, Wonderland is weird and strange and wonderful, and if Alice were a really complex character, she would totally wreck the story. Like, it would just be like there wouldn't be any. But Alice is simple. Alice doesn't change. There's something to hold on. She gives us a place to hold on to, right? Because in that case, you've got the character in the foreground is the unchanging thing, and the background is what is all going wild all the time. And in order for us to process that, anyway, the point is you can tell stories in other ways apart from having dynamic characters. Though I guess there aren't a lot of people in Hollywood who seem to believe that. But anyway, the point is, again, the conclusion I'm drawing here is that Galadriel is going to be one of our main characters in this show, and that her character is going to be undergoing, like, major, like, upheavals of circumstances, and she is going to be one of those characters whose arc is going to be central to the story of the show. That's, we get 3 shots of her, so I got to be a little bit cautious drawing too confident conclusions from that, but that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm getting from
it's also giving me a little bit of comfort, though, that there's been so much backlash about the strong female character the last few years, that people are just handing a muscled woman a gun, and if she can handle it, then she's a strong female character. That's not the definition of strong female character. We want a strong character who happens to be female. So if we are getting a Galadriel who does have those kind of nuances and levels, then I'm way more interested. And it means that maybe they are taking a little bit more care of these characters and thinking about it a little bit more, and not just, oh, she's strong and sexy and has armor and functional. Cool.
Right. Yeah. If we got nothing but those first two shots,
mm-hmm.
that would have been on the table, right? That we're getting that kind of strong.
But that hot second is enough for us to be like, oh,
there's more going on here with her character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's I think that's interesting. Anyway, okay. There's obviously much more that could be said, but let's.
We have 23 minutes left.
We have 23 minutes there. Let's leave it for now because I want to talk about something else too. All right.
I know you have a lot to cover, sir.
We do have a lot to cover. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside for now. I want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit more about critfic, because I talked about this a few weeks ago, and there have been a lot. I've been getting a lot of questions and seeing some, and there's a few things I want to explain a little bit more. That I think there are a lot of people who are confused, and enough people are confused that it's obviously my fault. So let me explain a couple things a little bit better. What I mean by critfic and why I think it's an important issue for people to be aware of. I said last time, at the end of last time when I talked about wanting to talk about this, that the number one thing that I was regretting about how I framed things the first time was simply just saying, don't do it, you shouldn't do it. Here's the thing that I want to carefully emphasize, because I'm not backing down from that. I still think you shouldn't do critfic, but I want to make an important distinction that I think a lot of people weren't seeing. The core issue with critfic, what critfic is, it's not... The core issue is that it's not analysis of the work. It is a different thing. When you are making a statement, when you are making up a story about what is going on in the head of the artist who created the work, or what circumstances influenced the making of the work. When you're making a statement about either one of telling a story about either one of those things, right? You are not saying anything you're not doing analysis of the work. What you're doing is a different thing. And the problem with critfic is that people make those statements as if they are saying something about the work. And it creates confusion, which leads to nonsense. So let me give an example. This is the one, what inspired this? Like, a reason I coined this term and started talking about this was the response to the Hobbit films. And I got really frustrated, not because people thought the Hobbit movies were bad. I quite agreed with them there. But what really frustrated me about the negative response to the Hobbit films was that what I kept hearing was nothing but critfic. People would say, the Hobbit movies are bad. And I'd say, why? Why do you think the Hobbit movies are bad? And they'd say, well, they were just a money grab. Or, it's because of the split from 2 movies into 3. And I'm like, okay. Sure. Okay. Now, so think about the first of those statements. They're just a money grab. That is a claim about what the motivations of the filmmakers was, right? And perhaps it's true. I mean, of course, on the one hand, of course it's true. Every movie ever made was made in order to make money, right? Every indie film ever created, they presumably actually wanted to make a profit from that film, even if a modest one.
Kind of always the goal of filmmaking.
It's kind of it's a business situation, right? So, but anyway, even apart from that, right? Again, like my issue is not like, is that a valid thing to say that the Hobbit movies were a money grab? My point is that by making that claim about what motivated the filmmakers, you've still said nothing about why it's a bad film. At all. But sense. You think you have, and you sound like you have, and everybody kept doing this. This is what I kept hearing. Everybody kept making claims like this, and then thinking that a conversation about the films had happened, and nothing was said. And so the first one is a claim about the motivations of the filmmakers. The second one, it's because of the split from 2 movies into 3. That's why the Hobbit movies are bad movies, right? Well, okay, that is a statement about the circumstances which impacted the making of the films, right? Now, was that a factor that was involved in some ways? Did it contribute to the badness of the? It very likely did contribute to the badness of the film.
You still haven't told me about the film.
You still haven't told me a thing about the film, right? Not the first thing. Neither of them is a statement about the film. So now, and other thing I would want to clarify, you're always free to say, I didn't like it. Like, that's fine. You can say, and you don't have to justify that, right? If you're just, if your only goal is to say, I dislike that, then I'm not, so, you know, I don't want anybody to think that what I'm saying here is that, like, you must always be able to prove all of your statements with, like, concrete analysis. If your statement is, I hated the Hobbit films, that's fine. You don't need a, you don't need an excuse for that. But if you're going to say, this is a bad movie, or this is a bad adaptation of Tolkien, well, that's a claim that you do need to support, right? And if you don't want to support that, stop saying it. Just say you didn't like it, right? Yeah. But that's the kind of there's a kind of intellectual dishonesty that CritFic can kind of trick you into, right? Where you might even think you've said something substantive about the film, and again, I'm not blaming people who do this. Like, this is absolutely endemic. Once you notice this, you see it literally everywhere, on every level, right? And I'm not just saying, like, oh, like the naive amateurs who are always doing this. All of the professionals are doing this. Film critics do this. Scholars do this. Everybody. It is completely endemic to, especially to the modern world. I think it's kind of always happened, but especially in the modern world, this is always happening.
And I think really natural. I think, you know, there is this desire to feel like you have a place in the conversation, and the best way to do that is to judge something. So it's kind of a cop out, but
that's exactly it. Like, I would say you're kind of like, I don't think it's a sort of a reasonable or respectable thing to do, to try to have it both ways, right? Again, if you're just wanting to express an opinion, I didn't like it, that's fine. And you can even explain why you didn't like it, and it doesn't matter, honestly. Like, again, because you're welcome to your opinion about that. You're welcome to how your reactions are your reactions. But again, if you're going to make claims that was about, like, the way that what they're doing with Tolkien is bad, and obviously, you know, it's not hard to see the relevance to the current situation and all these things that I'm saying. You do have I mean, in my opinion, if you're going to make claims like that, you do have a sort of a responsibility to be prepared to explain that rationally and courteously, ideally. But the problem is that CritFic doesn't do that and cannot do that. Like, it is simply and let me give a personal example. And Maggie will like this. It's a non-Tolkien example. I strongly dislike the Star Wars prequels. I hated them from when I first saw them in the theaters. I had this moment years ago, about 4 years ago or so. My younger son was like 9 or 10, and he'd seen the prequels. We had my wife and I were not in full agreement over her objections. She withdrew, she went along with showing our sons the prequels. When we watched Star Wars together for the first time, we had a big debate, my wife and I did, about whether we should even show them the prequels. And we decided we should. The argument that I made that convinced her was, like, we can't just, like, raise them in ignorance. Like, they're going to be exposed to this sooner or later, so we might as well do it in the home, in a safe environment. So exactly, right, yeah. So anyway, but she actually would not watch them with them. Like, she refused. So she watched the original trilogy and then she left. She just can't handle it. Anyway,
I love it.
So we had this moment. It was a couple years after this, right? It was a couple years after this. My younger son comes to me, and he was, I mean, he wasn't like crying or anything, but he was upset. He's like, Dad, I don't understand. Everybody says The Phantom Menace is horrible, but it's my favorite Star Wars movie. Why is it bad? Why does everybody say The Phantom Menace is a bad movie? And it was really, like, heart-stirring moment, right? he couldn't see it. And it was really hard. I mean, first of all, it put me in a really hard position, because if there's anything I hate more than trying to convince people that something's awful, I can't think what it is. Like, I hate that, right? If I strongly dislike something and think it's bad, I'll usually just not talk about it. I strongly dislike dismantling something and like explaining what's horrible about it. I find it unpleasant. Okay, that's partially true. It's also partially a lie. It's also, there's another sense in which it's like all too pleasurable to dismantle something else.
Yeah.
All too pleasurable in a way that makes me feel really dirty afterwards.
Right.
Basically.
Like, I don't want to engage in all of that negativity, but sometimes it's fun to just
like to build myself up because of like at the expense of someone in something else. Like it's anyway. On several levels, it's something I try not to do. But anyway, so here I was, and I'm like, what do I do? What do I say? So like, when confronted with something like that, crit fic is not going to satisfy him, right? I mean, if I had responded to my son by saying, oh, well, so the prequels are bad because George Lucas was like completely off the chain, right? I mean, like George Lucas was just like out of his mind and had completely lost his way in making those films. My son would have been there like, okay, but why is The Phantom Menace a bad movie? Right. You haven't explained anything, right? And I mean, what I was able basically to, I'm like, look, one of the main things is like the dialogue is so bad. Like the dialogue is so bad. And it was interesting. It was actually interesting watching them. I was particularly sensitive during Attack of the Clones, during the whole like inexpressibly painful and cringy Anakin and Padme romance sequence in Attack of the Clones, right? And I was like watching it with them when I was showing it to them the first time, and I'm like writhing, as I'm watching these scenes. And then I look over at my sons, who were, again, at the time, they were like 13 and 8 or something like that, my two sons. And I look over at my sons, and they're just like unaffected because they weren't paying attention to the dialogue. Like, they didn't care. They didn't care at all.
Well, it's kind of making me think about that character arc thing too. Like, they didn't need those characters to have an arc. They were just moving the story along, so they didn't need that emotion or that depth.
No, and that's why it was so shallow in the end in its effect. But anyway, so it's like, if you're going to, if you're ever in a parental situation like that, right? When you need, when there's a situation, because when you're saying this is a bad thing, this is a bad work of art, again, there's responsibility to be able to explain that, right? And crit fic is just not going to help you. So if discussion of the work itself is the question that you're interested in, you really need to avoid crit fic. You need to stop and make sure that you're doing actual analysis of the film, not making statements about the circumstances of the film's creation or making up stories, imagining things about what may or may not have been going through the head of the person who was doing it at the time. And it's, in the end, it's a way of shirking hard work. I mean, pointing to circumstances is easy. Like the money grab thing, or the 2 movies to 3 movies. It's easy to make claims, right? It's a money grab, ergo it was bad, right? That's an easy claim to make. And there's not, what do you have to do to prove it? Like, they made a lot of money, so that proves your point, right? I guess. There it is. But you're just avoiding the work, right? Hot takes are simple. Analysis is hard. Like, actually supporting your argument with clear evidence and putting together that argument in a way that's going to be compelling, that's hard to do. That's a lot of work. And there's always the temptation to avoid this. And again, please don't misunderstand. This is not me being elitist, being like, only us true scholars do this kind of thing. Let me tell you, if there is one thing that I see throughout the work of professional scholars, it is this tendency to avoid this hard work. I don't know how many scholarly articles I have read over my career where people are making really interesting observations, and then it comes to the place where you're supposed to do the really hard work of synthesizing that stuff together and making a really interesting conclusion, and the author just punts. or they don't even attempt. They're just like, so in conclusion, we see, look at all these lovely observations I've made. Thank you very much. Right? I mean, like, that's like the end of 75% of scholarly articles that I've ever read. Right? It's really hard. Making observations, building an argument, drawing a conclusion, that's really hard to do. It's a lot of work to do. And so therefore, even unconsciously, there's always going to be the temptation to like find the path of least resistance, right? And so having recourse to, knee-jerk reactions, sloppy thinking, critfic, it's very natural. Like it's very understandable that happens.
And I also I enjoy engaging in it sometimes. So I want to make sure I'm okay admitting that as well. And I hope you're still my friend after I say that, Corey. But it is really fun to engage in that. I don't think we should say it's, and I know you're not saying this, but we're not saying it's off the table. It's a great way to connect with people. It's a great way to shoot the shiz after seeing a movie and just really have a good moment of oh, let's dig in. But that's different than analysis. It's very different than
analysis. Yeah. And if you're gonna insist that the thing is bad, or again, if you're gonna insist this thing is butchering Tolkien, you've crossed the line. If you're gonna use those,
and if you're gonna use those words that we said we're gonna try not to use, of betrayal, infidelity, all those really heavy words, you gotta be able to talk about that.
Exactly. But exactly what you were just talking about is exactly the kind of thing that I want to recognize, right? I'm not at all saying that you can't, it's not okay if people want to speculate about what was going on in the mind of the artist. That's a legit, on its own, that's you can, that's a fine subject of conversation.
And it's a great exercise, it's really, I think it's good, especially if you are a creative person, to think about somebody's process. I think that's really important to engage with speculatively. But that's not a citation. That is not a factual. That is discussion and speculation. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So keeping that in mind is always one difficult. I mean, whenever I hear people doing this, I always think they are way more confident that they know what's going on in the heads of these other people than is probably true. But again, if that's what you're doing, that's okay. And the fact is, I was defining critfic as making these, claims about, a statement about the circumstance or a claim about what was going on in people's heads, and mistaking it for a statement, a claim about the work, right? As if you're making a statement about the work. But the fact is, most of the time, I think, the work is not itself actually the focus.
Right.
I don't think most people are actually interested in discussing the thing as a work of art. But the problem is they still use that language, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think this issue comes in, right? If what you're interested in is speculating about the mind of the maker, if what you're interested in is the inside scoop about the circumstances of the filmmaking, right? What was going on behind the scenes when the movie was being made, and so maybe in the Hobbit films, what you're really interested in is the differences between the filmmaking process for the Lord of the Rings and the filmmaking process for the Hobbit, and how things were not under control, and whatever, the differences, and okay, cool. If that's what you're interested in, that's totally fine. I'm not saying that it's wrong or bad to be interested in those things and to be asking those questions. But just don't make the mistake. It's all about the confusion, right? It's all about confusing a statement about the circumstances, a statement about the author, for analysis of the work. And stepping across that line really incautiously. Right. That's the problem. And people do it all the time.
This isn't new. I mean, Death of the Author, when was that written, right? I mean, this is English 101 is the thing we all have to read of, do you consider the author when you're reading a book? And a conversation I, just had with my class about J.K. Rowling, and, we have often had at Signum with H.P. Lovecraft, this conversation about the author and their life do you take that into account when reading the work? Like, this is not new. So
not at all.
Take a breath and try to engage with the actual art and see what you can glean from that itself.
Yeah, and even, you know, when you think about that, you think about the one of the reasons people who have listened to a lot of my podcasts will know I am rarely interested in talking about the life of the author and bringing that into the discussion of the work, and I'm sometimes actively resistant to that. One of the primary reasons that there are two reasons why that's my tendency when I'm doing this kind of analysis. One is because I'm very sensitive to the blurring of that frontier, right? When you're bringing in, especially like things that get brought in that are mere speculations about what Tolkien like might have been thinking or feeling about a certain thing, right? Or like things that he said about a thing at one point in his life and applying it to a thing that he wrote at a totally different point in his life, right? And I mean, any of us who have lived a life, which I think is most of us, will know that like your mindset 25 years ago probably not the same as your mindset towards things right now, right? So you have to be careful about this. And I usually find it tends to get done a little incautiously in those ways, and it just makes me uncomfortable right away. And I'm just like, let's just not. Can we just not? I mean, because we. In order to do that carefully, in order to do that well, a whole lot of more work needs to be done. But that's usually not what people are wanting to do. People are wanting to bring in, like, oh, but Tolkien was Catholic, so, therefore we know that this reading of this passage must be right. And I'm like, golly, gosh, okay. We can't do that. Like, we can't, that's a problem, right?
If you want to say that that's interesting to note, great, hang on to that. But that's not what we're talking about here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. So that's one reason why I tend to avoid that. Another reason why I tend to avoid that is that, again, I want to keep my focus on the work. And as soon as you start talking about the life of the author, one of two things is happening. Either you're confusing your data sets, right? Again, you're like drawing lines between facts about his life and observations from the book, and you're trying to draw lines between them. And I'm like, I'm really tenuous. I think that those lines are often really tenuous, and so I don't want to go there. But another thing is like, wait, what are we talking about now? Because a lot of times what I find is that the conversation as soon as we start talking about that, the conversation starts to shift, and we're no longer making observations about and drawing conclusions about the work. We're now drawing conclusions about him, the person, right, and about his life. And I'm not saying that making observations about a book or about a movie in order to draw, like, so say you wanted to, if you were to, I take the like random statement I made before about how like, George Lucas was like, had completely lost his focus, right, when making the prequels, right? Okay, say you wanted to write a thesis on that subject, right? What exactly? How did George Lucas lose his mind exactly, right? In doing that, like, you can draw so you want to draw conclusions about like George Lucas's frame of mind based on evidence in the films that he was making. Okay, that would be an interesting exercise, right? I'm not saying you can't do that. But what I would be saying again in my podcast is like yes, maybe we could try to draw some conclusions about Tolkien the person based on what we're seeing in his text. And sometimes I'll kind of point, but I'm like, that's not my interest. Like that's not what I'm wanting to do. I want to draw conclusions about the book. So let's stick to it.
Yeah. And from a film perspective, I really do enjoy looking at the past works of people because that so influences what happens next in terms of craft. But in terms of inferring meaning, I don't think you can say that guy directed Transformers, so he's crap. Right. Like you got to bring a little more to the table. Like, was it his camera angles? Was it the too many lens flares? Whatever.
Right.
Your thing is.
And like exactly. So what made it bad? And then an interesting thing, right now, let's look at another film. Like, is he doing the same crap things? Has he learned something? Right.
Did he learn?
Did he
have to do that for some conclusions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did the studio have him under his thumb? Which I know we were going to talk about studios and conglomerates, but we'll have to pin that. But we'll you never know what the influences are. So let's not engage with that and just say.
At the end of the day, that's my biggest thing. It's one of the. So, I mean, I will admit to a bias. Like, I am just myself not interested. Like, I am. Like, if there's one category of like things that lots of people are interested in talking about, the number one thing I am least myself spontaneously interested in is celebrity gossip, right? I don't think there's anything that I know of in the world that I am less interested in than celebrity gossip. I absolutely could not care at all.
I can't say the same thing, Corey.
I know, and it's fine. I'm not judging.
But I'm not bringing it here. That's the difference.
I'm sure.
I love that stuff. And I will,
sure.
And I don't mean gossip like Kardashians. I mean, like what film did they work on and who's going where, what. It's like, I love that stuff. And maybe they felt this way. But...
No, I'm sure that like there is some defect in my own character and intellectual makeup that underlies my lack of interest in this, but I am not interested in it at all, and so therefore I'm biased against it, and I acknowledge that. So like I'm trying to like deal with that, and I'm not trying to judge anybody who is fascinated, who sees a film and is primarily fascinated in the personalities behind it and what's going on and wants to hear all about what Orlando Bloom was saying during this scene and whatever. Like, I actually find the cast commentary generally fairly tedious when I'm like in the Lord of the Rings films. Even like I'm not very interested in what the cast. Like, it's my least favorite of all of the audio commentaries in the Lord of the Rings films. I just don't care. Like, I just don't care. That's not what I'm interested in. But again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's fine for people to be interested in that. Again, it's just about being clear about what you are doing and what you are not doing.
And I fully agree with Brett here in the chat when he says, my issue with it is when somebody says that it's finality, like they make a statement as if it is a fact.
Right, like about the author and what the author was thinking. And exactly.
Yeah, we cannot do that.
You absolutely can. You can. Anyway, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. So yeah, the other topic we were going to get to, but which we will save for next week, just to give a little preview of that. We want to talk about, there's been a lot of there are a lot of people who are concerned, not just about what they've seen in the trailer, but about the mere fact that this show is being produced by Amazon, right? And so I want to talk about production and the pressures on production and like groups and conglomerates and what this means for an adaptation. I want to make sure that we can, in my opinion, in large part, this is a question of like this is like an applied crit-fic question. A lot of what I hear about this, I would classify as crit-fic. I mean, the mere statement, I think this looks horrible because Amazon made it, is crit-fic. Like there's no connection between those two statements. You're not saying anything about the substance of the thing. You're merely, again, you're making a statement about the circumstances of its making. But so I want to talk more about those circumstances. What does this mean, right? It's parallel to, and I hear a lot of people paralleling it to, the Disney and Star Wars / Marvel question, right? What's going, what Disney has done to Star Wars and all that kind of thing. I don't want to get too far down that exact rabbit hole.
I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, but actually, I am a little bit interested to talk about it in that I think it's very much connected to this thing, and I hear a lot of similarities, and I hear a lot of people making exact parallels between Amazon is doing to Tolkien what Disney did to Star Wars, and I'm like,
you still haven't told me anything.
You haven't told me anything, right? You haven't told me anything either about Star Wars or about Tolkien, actually. So anyway, that's what we'll talk about first. Or not necessarily first. That's what we'll talk about next time. We're also going to have another guest next time. And we're going to discuss Numenor and the Second Age, and hopefully the issue of the time compression, the projected time. We don't know exactly what the time compression is going to be, but the issue of time compression in the Second Age in the Rings of Power show. So those will be our subjects next time with a special guest. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Maggie, for an awesome conversation again today.
Thank you. Go team.
And we will see folks again next Wednesday for another show. Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Farewell.